Hey y'all, I'm Frederica Tapanwe, the host of this podcast, Debunking the Myth of a Superwoman, where I empower you to show up authentically while embracing the other side of your superpower. Come on in and join this conversation. Welcome. In today's podcast, I wanted to show up as a source for support for those who are or have experienced heartache and pain from losing a loved one. Recently, I was reflecting on how so many people have lost loved ones, including me, during this pandemic, and it brought me back to a time in my life when I first experienced losing a loved one. And knowing that the real battle and the struggle begins after the loss, I just wanted to express how important it is to embrace grief and position yourself to be supported during your time of grief. First, before I start, I wanted to mention that grief can show up for a number of reasons. Death of a loved one is the most common one, but loss of a job can cause one to grieve, divorce in relationships or friendship. But today, I will be talking about grieving due to the death of a loved one. If I may also mention that the reflections I share in this podcast is just from my own personal insights on grief and how I dealt with it when it showed up in my life. And this is no way a substitute for therapy, but I have attached some resources for additional help and support for those who may be triggered by what I share in this podcast. So let's just begin. What is grief? I just Googled grief, and a psychological definition that I got from it was it's an intense emotional experience triggered by a loss, right? It is intense. It's a shock oftentimes when somebody dies, especially a sudden one. But what I wanted to share, that the pain associated with grief can be debilitating. It can cause one to shut down because you don't know what to do. You're in this new, unfamiliar world, this emotional environment that you've never been in before, or you may have been in it before, but it's just so debilitating. You don't know what to do. And because death is difficult for some people to deal with, again, not knowing what to say, not knowing even how to show up to receive help, some people avoid talking about it and causing them to further isolate and suffer by themselves. So why I'm able to say this, I speak passionately about this because I had a weeping soul for a good portion of my life. I experienced death pretty much most of my life, I feel like, but I had a weeping soul for a good portion due to experience so much loss and not properly positioning myself towards healing or knowing how to grieve. When death first entered my life, I was very young. I was 14 years old when my father died. He died due to a medical procedure that went awry, and his sudden death just had me in shock. I was devastated. What's going on? I never even knew about death. In my immature mind at that time, I felt that people only died when they was young. So when my father died at 14 years old, leaving 16 children and a wife to grieve, yes, I am the youngest of 16 kids, that was devastating, not only for my family, but my father also was a bishop of a Pentecostal Christian organization. So he also left thousands of his followers to mourn. So this was just like a big deal, not only just for our family, but just for the church members, so on and so forth. It just left me, I felt abandoned, I felt unprotected, and then I felt God did me wrong. My father was serving in the capacity of a good person. He was helping many people change their mindset to something positive. He helped people with their families to become law-abiding citizens just by speaking and empowering them. So I was like, why did my father have to die, right? What is this about? And I just found myself experiencing emotions that I never felt before. Again, I'm 14 years old. At 14, you're trying to figure life at your own, right? You're going through all these different hormones. I'm transitioning. I'm into this teenage world now, so you know how teenagers can be. So I was dealing with all that. But in addition to that, I'm dealing with the loss of a father who was very present and active in my life. So I was asking, how did I end up here? What now? What do I do? My friends still have their father. So this was really challenging time for me. And like I said it before, I thought people only supposed to die when they were old. So my father died when he was in his 50s. So that definitely was out of the sequence in my timeline for him to go. And when my father died, that was the first time that my family, from what I can remember, had really experienced death. So I think at this time, my mother felt that maybe she should be a little bit more transparent, about what she's going through, so on and so forth. Because like I said, my father's death just took us all by surprise. Being raised in a Christian family, we're taught to petition God for everything. So we, go to counseling, and basically me and my siblings, we just suffered the best way we could. So as I said it before, getting back to my mother, my mother she felt that she wanted to be a little more transparent. I didn't realize years before my father passed, she had breast cancer and it was in remission and it came back. So she shared that with me, and when she shared that with me a couple of months after my father passed away, I panicked. I'm like, wait, what? Because remind you, because of the death of my father, I now put on lenses in which I'm feeling unprotected. I'm seeing everything as I can't trust anything. I don't know how this world's going to go. So when my mother now tells me she has breast cancer, I'm automatically assuming she's going to die. So for, quite a bit, this sent me into a panic. I had nightmares all the time. I was really in a tough place at this very young age. And that's one thing with life. Life just kind of goes on no matter what's happening in your life. And you kind of feel like it's so unfair. You almost feel like you're the only one that's dealing with it. But it's unfortunately one thing that is certain in life is death. So for the next 4 years, I could just continue just to deal with my father, but things began to still happen. As I told you before, my mother, confided in me that her breast cancer came back. So from 14 to 18 years old, life was giving me the business. Not only did I lose my father at 14, I lost 3 siblings. My grandmother passed away, and then my mother eventually lost her battle to cancer. So again, this just was a lot for me to deal with during this time frame. But one thing I can say, even though I was dealing with so much death, my main priority really was my mother. Like my mother, just watching her just fight that battle and watching her going from this robust woman to this, skinny, helpless lady. That was so much. So my priority, even in my grieving, was to make sure that my mother was okay. So I was grieving, but I really wasn't really grieving properly, I should say. And to be honest, I did not want to feel any emotions around the death. So I just did whatever I had to do to come out of this evil world that I see in front of me. So I just kept suppressing any bad feelings I was trying to resurface in my life, and I just kept continuing to show up in life like all was well. I showed up like a superwoman. I think what happened is, watching my mother, I never really saw her, of course, despite the breast cancer taking over her. But when my father first died, my mother, she had an emotional outburst then, but when she lost her 3 children and her mother, and while she was battling cancer, she was showing up strong. I never even seen her like really just fall apart until the breast cancer took over her body, but she showed up unscathed. And that's how I showed up. I learned from my mother how to put a smile on pain. I would later learn that I was mimicking a generational and social structure of how women show up unscathed despite enduring so much. We always show up like we have it all together, but oftentimes we're dealing with so much, and it is silently wreaking havoc on our bodies. And I'll get into that a little bit more. But what I want to say, when you don't deal with your issues, they will eventually expose themselves somewhere in your life. And as I stated before, I showed up like a superwoman. During that time in my life at 14 years old, 15, 16 years old, I was recognized as one of the nation's top junior track and field athletes. So I had a platform in which I was seen, I was admired, I was being awarded. It was a happy place. So track was like my therapy, I guess. Track was like my place where I could suppress all of that toughness that I was dealing with. It was the way I was able to show up like a superwoman, right? I was winning. All my peers wanted to be like me. So I was showing up like a superwoman, but really wasn't. I was really silently suffering. So as a result of me just constantly suppressing, I eventually was awarded a full athletic scholarship to the University of Tennessee. I went to college, still suppressing all, because I need to take advantage of this opportunity. When I went to college, I had no parents. I had to figure it out. I had this great opportunity in front of me. So I showed up like I'm ready to go. But eventually, because I've suppressed all that and didn't receive any proper help, my body would eventually betray me physically, which led me to being hospitalized for like weeks without a proper diagnosis. I had high fevers. I had terrible stomach aches, and all the tests was coming back negative. I mean, yes, my white cell counts was a little high, but I just think it just was basically all that stress that I was putting on myself because I was not able and did not know how, and not even capable of releasing the pain that I was dealing with. So one thing I want to leave you with this, in this podcast, is that, like I said before, life is not certain. Death is what is certain. We all have an expiration date that often shows up unexpectedly. It can show up while we and on vacation, while we're at a wedding, while we're at a baby shower, But we can't go through life just saying, oh God, am I going to die today? Is it going to be next week? No, we have to live life to the fullest, right? So we have to, again, figure out a way how to present ourselves so that we can just heal as we go through this grieving process. What I did learn was that grieving actually is the transportation towards healing. But I haven't learned that till years later. So as a result of me not having the proper tools back then, I continued living through my trauma while enjoying the triumphs that life presented. I just I was doing what I had to do. I eventually met someone. I got married, and my spouse was like the antidote to all of my pain. I mean, he showed up at the perfect time in my life. I was so grateful that I said, God, thank you for blessing me with a husband during this time in my life. Is exactly what I needed. It gave me the bandwidth to continue just to want to fight and go on. We were very compatible. We were like-minded. We were business-minded. And life just was great. And I finally was at a point where I was able to take a breath and just just release and inhale. Just release and inhale. And so I just enjoyed life. We had an amazing African-inspired marriage, and everything just was going well. We bought our first piece of property. And we had a baby. But unfortunately, as I told you, life continues to give you what it's supposed to give you unexpectedly. I would be sucker punched again when my husband will suddenly die in a car accident. I know, right? Devastated is an understatement of how I felt. I literally was drawn back to the sunken place. But now I'm drawn back to this familiar place that I've been to. I'm now being labeled a widow, and a single mother, a single parent. Like, all this is just too much for me to be. And one thing, I was one of those people in life that tried to structure my life a certain way. I always said I wanted to be married before I had my child. Now I'm in the exact place where I didn't want to be. I'm a widow, and I'm a single mother. So this pain associated with my death of my husband, it was much greater than the previous death I experienced. It almost felt like I've never even experienced death before. And I think when I think back, when my father died, yes, I was sad, but I still had my mother, so I still had that parental figure, And my brothers, they were older than me. They were in and out the house. I had other siblings. Remember, I was the youngest of 16 children, so I was sad that they died, but not seeing them all the time, I guess it was a little easier to deal with. And then my grandmother, she died when she was older, so she died in the timeline that I felt that people are supposed to die when they're older. And my mother dying, hers was more of an anticipated death, so she was able to kind of prepare me for what was to come. And if I'm honest, when my mother died, I actually was happy that she was no longer suffering, even though I was sad that she was no longer with me. So you see, I was just experiencing different ways, but with my husband, the emotional pull on me was definitely something new. And even though I kind of felt immune to the grieving process, meaning that I've been through it before, it just put me in a place where, okay, I knew I had to do something different because now I had this little baby that's relying on me. So I did seek grief counseling. I did seek grief counseling, but I went one time. Me and the person, I guess we didn't really, maybe match, and it probably took a couple of times. I went one time, and I didn't go back. Sometimes you have to go, maybe speak to maybe 2 or 3 different counselors to find that match for you, but I didn't go back, so I think that kind of just stumped my healing a little bit during that time. But again, I just want to remind you, it's important to embrace the grieving process. And if this podcast is resonating with you and you lost a loved one, don't suppress your feelings and emotion like I did. As I told you before, grieving is actually the transportation towards healing. Talk about the loss, how the loss is affecting you. Grieve the memories of how your loved one showed up in your life. What did all that mean? What are we making around this death? As I told you, I felt abandoned. I felt unprotected. But that really wasn't the case. But that's just kind of what I felt. And so as a result, I was looking through life through those lenses, feeling unprotected. Face the griefs head on when it occurs so that you can begin to move to, towards your healing. Embracing my new role as a single mom and widow, that started me towards my path of healing. Knowing my little one needed me empowered me to get out of my sunken place. But this healing, it did not take overnight. It took, if I can say, sometimes doing that grief is so difficult. You have to go minute by minute, then hour by hour, then day by day, then week by week, then month by month. It's a process. And it's okay to continue life without someone. For a while, I felt like, oh my God, I felt guilty. Like when I started dating, and you almost feel like you're supposed to be sad because your lost one died, so you feel like you shouldn't go on with life, that you're supposed to be in this space, of unhappiness. But that's not true. You can go on with life. This is why it's so important during my healing phase. Even though I felt guilty doing this, I just had to figure out a way to move beyond to a happier place. Because I thought, because I lost my husband, am I supposed to say sad? But how could I, when I had this little girl, this little baby looking towards me for her help? Author Dennis Boggs said that feelings buried alive don't die. And it's so true. Like, time may dull the pain, but healing and arriving at a place of acceptance, that's only going to manifest through you doing the work over time. And what does that mean? That means taking purposeful steps towards self-healing, which is a lifelong commitment to yourself, And when you arrive to that place of acceptance and healing, pay it forward and help someone move through that grief. I remember when as I told you before, when I first lost my husband, I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't even know what I could do. And I remember my sister introduced me to a friend who lost her husband a couple of years ago. And she was speaking to me, and that really helps to speak to someone who's kind of that's kind of similar, going, or either have been through what you went through, or kind of going through what you've been through. And I spoke to this lady who lost her husband, for whatever reason. I forgot how he died. But she told me the next year they decided, let's go on vacation. So her daughter and her mother, they was going on vacation. On their way to the airport, they got in a car accident, and her mother died in a car accident, y'all. I was like, oh my goodness. So when she told me this story, and I just saw this lady stand in front of me telling this story, just like how I'm speaking to you, it kind of gave me hope. It gave me just like, okay, it gave me a platform to stand on, to let me know I can do this. Yes, it's going to be hard work, but I can get through this. And I continue to show up as I'm showing up today for individuals that are grieving, by processing and just standing as a place of a conduit just to listen. Oftentimes, people who are not grieving, or who just a friend of somebody grieving, they don't know what to say, they don't know what to do. Just sit and listen. That person that were grieving, they will just share how they're feeling. They're going to act like everything's fine, like I'm okay, it's God's will, or this, that, and the third. That's not really what they really mean. They're not feeling that, but for some reason, the person that's grieving ends up being the one that's like comforting those around them. So I just be careful with just how you're showing up and what and how you feel that grief should look. As I told you, I mimicked how to hide my trauma through my mother, and I subconsciously was doing that for my daughter, really not knowing when I'm thinking back, when my daughter, when I would feel bad, like had a bad day and was crying, I would retreat to my basement because I didn't want my daughter to see me cry. Well, I'm doing the same thing my mother did, right? I didn't want my daughter to see me cry, and so that gave her, I took away her agency to grieve properly. So now when she, not even grieve properly, but I guess to show emotions, like, so when she got older, she was expressed, like she felt like almost weak when she wanted to cry because of something that made her sad. So again, we just have to be careful of what examples are we're looking at, and to make sure, are those examples really helpful? Are they the proper way? So many years later, I'm learning all these tools and affirmations and stuff now that I'm throwing at you. But it takes a while. But like I said, I continue to serve as a source of comfort for others. And those people that I speak with, listen, like within months or so, I can see the difference in them. I can remember just speaking to someone who lost their husband, I guess at the beginning of the year. And I recently lost my brother a couple of weeks ago, and she now was serving as a comfort for me, So you just be surprised what we can do. Even though we feel like we're grieving, just put yourself in a position that you can be helped. And if you're not the person that's grieving, put yourself in a position where you can be a support for someone, as if I'm doing today. So today, I share my experiences with grief as a reference that you can survive the journey of grieving as it transfers you to a place of healing. And just recognize we all going to grieve differently. I experienced grief as a child, as a young adult, as an older adult, and I'm still experiencing. I'm still dancing with grief, and it's not done any specific way. There's no handbook that says grieving should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I just ask you to embrace it, but just don't stay there too long, and just recognize and understand that you will get through it. Yes, it's difficult work, but you will get through it. So please stay on this journey with me and like and share and subscribe to this podcast as I continue. I just basically want to glamorize being transparent and expose those issues that are hiding behind that superwoman persona that we often present. We always want to present ourselves that everything's okay. But it's not. And I feel that now I just wanted to just glamorize it and let you know that it's okay to say, today I'm having a bad day. It's okay to ask people for help and still be a superwoman. You could be a superwoman. You can be a person that has it all together, that's looking strong, but there can be days where you're not feeling like a superwoman, and that's all right. So I just want to expose that, and just let's just do this work together as we just continue to expose the issues that are hiding behind our superwoman's persona. Thank you for joining me, and let's continue this show. Take care. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube and podcast channels.